Good morning. I think I'm on. We're going to be studying in Genesis 42. If you want to turn in your Bibles there in just a minute, if I can get clipped in here, or I'll just stick it in my pocket. I don't care. It's good to be together. A lot of stuff happening. As many of you know, we're going to be building a building soon. I'm excited about that. We'll have our groundbreaking in a couple of weeks. If you're part of the group that's going to be enjoying our Faithful Pilgrims meal, make sure you let Nina know at the Welcome Center that you're planning to be there. If you're going to help with that, make sure we know. I know that's going to happen next Saturday. We're going to have that going on. So make sure you're getting excited about that. It should be fun. It's going to be outside, so we'll be out, a little bit fresh air with the weather we've been having. It should be nice. It's the theme of it this year happens to be a camping trip, so doing it out on the outside, kind of a cookout, seems outside seems appropriate with that. So come and have a good time and that's for the older folks that it's hosted by the younger folks. Let's call it that. And so if you consider yourself old, well, it's for you. And if you consider yourself young, come see me. We want your help. So it should be a lot of fun. But that's happening soon. But a lot of stuff happening around here, and it's neat to see that going on. So let's begin with a moment of prayer. And again, we'll be in Genesis 42 this morning in our Bible study together. Lord God, thank you. Thank you for the way you've blessed us and allowed us to be together. For the way that you're answering prayers with our building. We cherish the day that we can have a new auditorium, and we're thankful to you for answering that and getting our permits and getting things done so that we can let that happen. Bless us and be with us as we plan for that groundbreaking in just a couple of weeks. We do ask your blessings on our time together in your word now. Lead us, guide us, and help us to grow. Allow your Spirit to show us and reveal to us things that we need to understand. We thank you and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. I want you to imagine that you are a farmer. You grew up on a farm in Haiti. You have a nice plantain farm there. By Haitian standards, you're rather wealthy, and you're doing well. But an earthquake comes and devastates your island. Kind of a plausible scenario if you know their history. And all of a sudden, you've lost the infrastructure's broken. You're facing certain ruin. Families are starving, and the economy is decimated. But you do hear that in the United States, they're offering relief. And so you and your siblings decide you're going to make a trip to Washington, D.C. so you can meet with someone, so you can get some relief. You travel to this world that doesn't speak the Haitian Creole language that you know so well. They speak English, and you can't hardly understand a word they say. And you walk into this culture that is so different from your island nation, this poor island that Haiti is. And you see, and you land in Washington, D.C., and you go to the White House. And you walk in to meet with the president because he's the one that's going to grant you this relief. Number one, how would you feel? What would be on your mind? And what would you say to the president? Show me the money. I mean, that's why you're there, honestly. You know your time's limited. Let's get right to the point. What would you say? What would be your attitude? How would you, it'd be scary, wouldn't it? There'd be a sense of intimidation in that. What would you be thinking? Besides, I sure hope I get my money. Oh. The reason you spent the money to get there, the great quantity of money to get there would be out of hope. And in some ways, you're hoping, is this investment going to pay a return? because you're spending a lot of money to get there. And if you don't, what's your next option? Nobody on the island has money. No one around you has food. So how are you gonna feed your family? What's going to happen to things here? In many ways, that's the story of Joseph that we're going to be looking at today. The story is not Haiti, though, and it gets a rather bizarre twist if you really want to be honest, because the president is not really the president; it's their brother that they sold into slavery. Talk about a weird twist. And so as we see them in this story, I mean, the brothers, as they approach this very, very powerful man, the second most powerful man in the world right now. Egypt is a huge empire at this time in history. And they're coming there. They've invested the last of their little farm money that they have. They're shepherds. They're nothing compared to the great pharaohs and Egyptians. They're seen as peasants in the eyes of the Egyptians. And yet they approach the leader of this world asking for help. And even if you take out the element of this is their brother they sold into slavery, this whole story is just, it's wow. There's so much going on. The emotions that they must have been feeling, the thoughts that they've been feeling. It would have been tremendous. What if we don't come back with food? They don't know how much food's there. What if there's not enough food? We've got our families going to starve to death if we don't come back with something, because of the famine that's going on in the world. And so, as we set up the stage for what's going on here, I hope you understand there's a lot of emotions, a lot of tension that's going on in this story. And then you throw in the fact that they've done something horrible, like selling their brother into slavery. And that just puts a weird twist into it all the way around, and it adds to it. But yet, we begin to see how God works through that. Okay, let's read this text here. There's 34 verses here, and I want us to read it. I'll let someone else read. If they want to read verses 1 through 13, we'll get started. Just read real loud. If you're at home reading, you may not hear it on the microphone, but read in your Bibles. Genesis 42, 1 through 13 is where we're going to start with. Please, someone.
When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others, because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan also. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, "to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected." "No, my lord," they answered. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." "No," he said to them, "you have come to see where our land is unprotected." But they replied, "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man, who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more."
Somebody else, verse 14 through 32. Another chunk there.
Joseph said to them, "It is just as I told you. You are spies, and this is how you'll be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept said to one another, "Surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. And that's why this distress has come on us." Well, Reuben replied, "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. And now we must give an accounting for his blood." They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. He turned away from them and he began to weep. But then he came back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to put each man's silver back in his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain on their donkeys and they left. At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver in the mouth of his sack. "My silver has been returned," he said to his brothers. "Here it is in my sack." Their hearts sank and they turned to each other, trembling, and they said, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. And they said, "The man who is Lord over the land spoke harshly to us and treated us as though we were spying on the land. But we said to him, 'We are honest men. We are not spies.' We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan."
Somebody else, finish up the chapter, 33 through the end there, 36, whatever it is.
Then the man, the lord of the country, said to us, "By this I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me. Take food for the famine of your households and be gone. And bring your youngest brother to me, so I shall know that you are not spies, but that you are honest men. I will grant your brother to you, and you may trade in the land." Then it happened as they emptied their sacks that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said to them, "You have bereaved me. Joseph is no more, Simeon is no more, and you want to take Benjamin. All these things are against me." Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, "Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you." But he said, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow to the grave."
Okay, let's imagine this from Joseph's perspective now. Joseph would have been dressed in very ornate Egyptian-style clothing. The traditional way that they wore their head back then would have been notable. It was very common for them to shave their heads. And so he would have dressed very clean shaven, especially his face. Whereas the Hebrews, in contrast, they would have worn their Hebrew-style garments. And of course, they would have put on their best before they went before him. But they would have been Hebrew-style. And in the tradition of the Hebrews, they would have had the big old burly beard. They would have made your beard look like nothing. I mean, it would have been that big old thick, these skinny beards that we have, like mine, is nothing compared to. They would have had the big old heavy thick beard, and they would have been dressed like that. And so they walk in, and immediately Joseph, he recognizes them. Well, he kind of questions, and he wants to make sure, doesn't he? But do they recognize him? No, so he plays dumb, doesn't he? Why do you think he's playing dumb with all this? What's up with these guys? What does he find out? Number one. They're hungry. That's the reason they're there. They're not looking for their long-lost brother. They're looking for food. What else do you notice you think that he would have noted from what he observes from them?
All of his family is still living.
Okay, all of his family's still alive, except for one, according to them. And they don't know that they're looking at him. which would have been a key factor, right? He's thinking, I pulled this off.
He remembered his dream about them kneeling.
Oh, that part's, he doesn't, and immediately he sees them bowing down before him. Remember the dream that he had earlier? The brothers are going to bow down before him, and he's going, oh man, God is still working, isn't he? That had to have been reassuring. You're looking at, and I forget, I was going to look that up, but I forgot to. I want to say that it's 10, 15 years. It's been a long time, and so he's changed a lot. You think if he was a younger person being sold, and how much our bodies change, especially you shave a guy bald, and he's used to been wearing a beard. He's wearing the fancy robes. It says he tried to disguise himself, is what one of the verses in there says. And so who knows? Did he put on a mask, or what did he ever do? He could have done whatever he wanted. He's in charge. He could have hid behind a screen or whatever. Number one, he doesn't give away by his voice. He speaks through an interpreter. So he's speaking entirely in Egyptian, which also says something about how much of the culture is he really grasped. He can fake anyone out that they think he's an Egyptian now. He looks and comes across like an Egyptian. They don't even think he's Hebrew. When he speaks to them, he speaks in Egyptian, and then they translate it into Hebrew. And when they speak to him, Joseph's listening, going, "I know what you're saying," but he waits till the interpreter so that he doesn't give himself away. It's interesting because I don't look like I speak Spanish, and I'm able to speak in Spanish. There's sometimes when people have said things in Spanish around me, and I just kind of snicker, and because I know what's going on. And most of the time, if you think they're talking about, they're not. Don't be so self-centered. It's not all about you. They're talking about other things usually. But I can listen. But just like when I walk through the room here, I can listen to different conversations in English, and same in Spanish. But it is kind of handy once in a while. I'll look over and say something like to a kid or something, and he'll look at me like, "What? You speak Spanish?" And same thing's going on with Joseph. It just blows him away. This guy can't speak Hebrew. No one knows Hebrew. That's not that common of a language. We're just poor farmers. I mean, if someone's using that illustration a minute ago, if someone stood up and started speaking Creole from Haiti, most of us in here would barely be able to recognize what language it is, let alone translate it. And if I stood here and was able to understand it and translate, you'd be going, "Wow, dude, where'd that come from, Daryl?" And that's going on with these guys. He speaks harshly to them, is what the text says. What's up with that?
Make them sweat.
It could be he's trying to make them sweat. I think part of it is we want to make Joseph this incredibly noble guy, but he's a human being too. I think part of it is also he wants to make sure their intentions. And how do they feel about Joseph? I think he's wanting to find out. This brother that you sold into slavery, yeah, they betrayed him, and I really do. The more I look at the text, the more I'm convinced that this is behind Joseph. This is not something, it is part of who he is, and it did form him into the person he is, but I don't think he carries ill will. I don't think he's not carrying this. Sometimes we go through things, and it marks our personality, it forms us, and we can carry those psychologically, and it really does mess with us all through our lives. I think that's their case more than his, though. I think there's some indications in this that this has scarred them more than it has scarred Joseph. And we're going to look at that in just a minute here. That Joseph, when you look at this, he's wanting to make sure, how's this affected you? And Joseph walks away with his conscience being okay with things. But in their case, they still carry a lot of guilt and shame from this event. Okay.
Well, and last week, I think I told you that Manasseh means forgive. And that was his first son.
Oh, yeah.
Joseph's first son. And then it says, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household.
Joseph seems to work through this. You see them arguing in this text. You see Reuben speaking out. And what does Reuben say? They're still fighting over what took place with Joseph, aren't they? There's a lot of guilt and shame in this. There's a lot of things that are going on. And Joseph, he could have revealed himself right off the bat. There's a Scottish minister in the 17th century that he writes, Joseph were left, if Joseph were left to himself, he would have revealed his identity in a moment, but that he was restrained by God, who was using him for the salvation of his brothers. Joseph holds back. He questions them 3 times and says, you're spies. Did he think they were spies? No, he's messing with their heads. He really is. Call it what it is. He's messing with them. But there's a reason he's messing with them, and I think that's God's hand here. Albert, you had your hand?
Initially it says Joseph remembered his dream. So it may be that, he was wanting to see them now.
Yeah. Well, it says there, surely we are being punished because of our brother. They saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we wouldn't listen. What's their recollection of him being sold into slavery? That's why this distress has come upon us. In the Hebrew, there's a play with words that's going on in this text here. And it really is, the writer's trying to get us to understand there's some distress that Joseph went through, and there's some distress that they're going through. They're freaking out right now. Again, what's on the line here? Our family could starve to death. Now we're realizing we could be in jail forever. We could die in an Egyptian jail because we've been accused of spying. We don't understand the culture. We don't understand the customs. All we know is this guy here that's in charge is accusing us of spying. I'll be honest, one of my biggest fears of traveling to a country where I don't speak the language is getting locked up in jail. Because I don't know the rules, and sometimes if you breaking the law, you can't just say, well, I didn't know the law. I'm sorry, that's not excusable in our country or in other countries. Just because you don't know the law doesn't mean you can break it. By living in that country, by traveling in that country, you're assuming it's assumed you're going to obey the law. And they're being accused of spying. They're in trouble here. It's interesting in here how that they've had to live with their conscience, and I want us to talk about our conscience for a while. What does our conscience do for us? In many ways, it can guide us. It can make us feel guilt. It can cause us to have action. In 1811, there was a federal fund that was set up in the United States that's called the Federal Conscience Fund. And basically what happened is after that there was people that had taken army blankets as souvenirs or failed to pay income tax, felt guilty about it, so they began sending that money into the government back in 1811. And the government didn't know what to do with this money, so they collected this money, put it in a fund. It began growing and growing. There's a story about a widow who's late. She was looking at her wife's books, and she noted that he had defrauded $50 a year from the government. And so she, after his death, she wrote a check for the amount that he had defrauded, sent it in, and the government's going, we can't prosecute. What do we do? Oh, well, we take this money and we put it in this fund. Evidently, this fund grew at one time to contain millions of dollars, because there's so many people that have felt guilty about the way. A lot of people anymore aren't sending it in because they realize I can be tracked and I can get in trouble if they catch me. And that fund has not grown quite as much with the technologies we have. But there's something about our conscience that it really does. We feel guilt and we feel some powerful things. It's in many ways, our conscience is kind of like if you have a gas leak. Do you realize that odor you smell, it warns us? Natural gas does not have an odor on its own. It is odorless. But they actually put a smell in it so that when you smell that, you go, because what happens if natural gas you have a natural gas leak in your home? Boom! It's not good. It can explode. And so our conscience becomes that warning, that gas smell. That we need. There's danger here. There's something going on. We can ignore it. We can distort it. We can bury it. We can cause all kinds of things with our conscience. But it is there for a reason. Now here you got these brothers 20 years after, or 15, 20 years after the fact, and what's happened to their conscience? It's being pricked. It's being awakened by this situation. Not because they recognize Joseph yet. That doesn't happen until next week, the next chapter that we study. But all of a sudden, this whole story comes apart, and they're feeling some guilt and some shame. They're feeling some things. On the other side of it, I see Joseph, and he's okay with things. He's not like, I'm going to zap them now. I'm going to hurt them. I'm going to have these guys beat for selling me they're going to become my slave. No. He gives them their money back in the story, doesn't he? I mean, you see actions that show he's dealt with this. He's forgiven them. He's moved on. And so our conscience can work a lot of different ways. Our conscience can mess us up in some ways, or our conscience can sometimes help us to grow, can't it? And we have to make a decision how we work with our conscience and how we deal with that. Because honestly, we can live in a state of guilt and shame, or our conscience can help us grow into becoming a powerful man or woman of God with faith. And we have to make a decision on that. And that's a call we make. Again, the conscience in and of itself isn't a bad thing. It's a good thing that we can talk about guilt and shame that we feel when our conscience is pricked, and that can be a horrible thing if someone wallows in it for 20, 30 years and allows it to limit them and stop them. They become phobic or manic in some way, and it controls their life, and it's a dangerous thing. But my conscience in some ways can also guide me and lead me in healthy ways to grow so that I don't. So I get out of the house when I smell that gas leak. I change my behaviors, and they didn't deal with theirs. They buried it, and so what happens? It messes with them. Edgar Allan Poe, his classic story, The Telltale Heart. It's this murderer couldn't sleep because he kept hearing the beating of a heart of the victim down in his basement. If I'll give away the ending, he wasn't hearing the victim's heart in the walls. Whose heart was he hearing? His own. His own heart was haunting him. And Poe, in his demented way of telling stories, those of you who know Poe, it really does. It reveals him as the murderer. David, following his adultery with Bathsheba and murdering Uriah. Psalm 32 is written. And he writes, "When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of the summer." That's Psalm 32, 3 and 4. I mean, you see that going on. Our conscience really does. We need to take responsibility for our guilt is the key thing. Joseph, has he taken responsibility for his guilt? I think so. He's allowed himself to take responsibility for it. He has worked through it. His brothers, on the other hand, have they taken responsibility? What's the story that Dad understands about their brother? The brother died. Have they ever revealed to him? There's no indication that they've ever revealed to him that they were the murderers, that they're the ones that sold him into slavery. He just died. Have they taken responsibility for their guilt? Not at all. And what happens when we don't take responsibility for our guilt? Oh, it festers. It can go septic. It really can. Joseph, he doesn't seem to hold a grudge. And how? I think he changes his perspective. How does he perceive his being sold into Egypt? It's part of God's plan, yeah. When they're bowing down before them, he's going, oh, finally, I get my moment. No, I think what he's thinking is, oh, that's what God said would happen. That's the way it's supposed to be. Now, he changed his perspective. How do they see things that happen? Oh, we were just evil people. And then if we don't change our perspective, we live and we wallow and we are controlled by that guilt and shame. Until you accept that God is in control and I need to embrace His grace. It is by grace that all these things happen. It's by grace that Joseph was sold into slavery. Now that sounds so bizarre when you say it out loud, but it really is the truth, isn't it? What would have happened had Joseph not been sold into slavery? God would have had to figure something else out because Joseph, he used Joseph. And it's so amazing. Joseph's going, I don't like the fact that I was sold into slavery. I don't like the fact that I went through all these horrible, but by God's hand, by God's grace, these bad things in my life happen, and I can move on from that. Now, when we go through stuff in our own lives, again, I can allow those things to control me, to dominate me, and I can live with guilt and shame over them, and I can live with this horrible feeling that it defines me. Or I can take ownership of it. I can do like Joseph did. I can work through it and then allow it to change my perspective and go, okay, but how's God going to use this in spite of me? In spite of what I've done or haven't done? Joseph, in this case, he was a victim. His brothers could have moved on from victimizers to, okay, we're going to, and they eventually have to. Because they end up, as you know the rest of the story, end up moving, and when Joseph reveals himself to them, they end up moving, they end up changing their perspective. You see Joseph changing his perspective when he perspective as he gives them back their money, as he sets them free. And yet, it's interesting what their comment is. This is what is this that God has done to us? They recognize that something's not right here. They're still trying to live with their conscience, aren't they?
But it was their own forgiveness that was condemning them, or lack of forgiveness.
It really is, yeah. And one writer, he says we need to learn to take responsibility for our guilt. He says the second step we need to take is we need to change our perspective. And the third one, he says, we need to receive undeserved grace. Until they receive undeserved grace, this action, this thing, it just messes with them, and it eats at them. Joseph, has he received undeserved grace? Yep. And he's able to move on, and in fact, he's able to thrive. You think about how he's thriving.
It sounds like most stories throughout this book, it's about this relationship that each person has, and if they have
Oh, yeah.
that relationship, they trust. And at some point, he was
Mm.
horrible place, it's okay because whatever it is, God's in control. And in every story that I'm understanding, it's these people that understand and accept that they don't have to get all sideways
Yeah,
and worry about stuff because it's all taken care of.
yeah. It's interesting because many times, and I look at this, and there's so much that I can relate to in this, and I think we all can, because all of us have difficult things that happen in our life, aren't they? Let's be honest, we do. It may not be as bad as being sold into slavery by your brothers. That's kind of one of that's on the top of the list if I have to name bad things that can happen to you. But we also have good things that happen to us too. All of us do. Even Joseph, his brothers, they all had good things that happened in their life. But how do we deal with these, and how do we work through these? Do we allow these things to define us, or do we deal with them? Do we live with our conscience? Because that's where Joseph seems to, he's learned to live with his conscience. He's been able to embrace grace. He's been able to allow these things to change us. The reason we feel guilt and shame over sin isn't so we can wallow in it, but so that we can draw near to God and embrace His grace. And if we don't embrace His grace, we've really missed it, haven't we? And then we've dealt with that shame, and when it can really mess up our Christianity in many ways when we do that too. Thoughts? Anything else on this, Phil?
Whether both positive or negative, because Joseph went through all that, and he got out of prison, and he goes to Potiphar, and then this negative thing came in, but he walked with God through good and bad,
Mm,
both.
yeah.
We knew his character. We see his character. And
Yeah.
that's who he is. And he's not going to change. He's going to be this. So if it's going to help his brothers and his family, he's going to be there for them because of God. Because of God.
Yeah.
I don't think it only was that Joseph was being wrong to his brothers. I mean, he gave his money back to them,
Mm-hmm.
gave them grain so their family wouldn't starve. I think it was just possibly God directing Joseph into teaching his brothers a little bit of kindness.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
God was you. I mean, I think God, and that's part of the reason why He doesn't just zap them right away. Or free them or reveal Himself right away. He wants to teach that God's working here to teach them some things and help them to work through some of their guilt and their conscience here.
Yeah, God's working.
And as we read the Bible, this isn't the story of people. This is a story of God. The book of Genesis isn't the story of Adam and Eve. It's the story of God creating Adam and Eve. The book of Matthew isn't the story of Jesus. It's how God used Jesus to change the world. And when we begin seeing God's the overall picture, we can get sidetracked by some of the... This story isn't the story of Joseph. This is how God works through Joseph. And that's the amazing part of it. Part of this, and the challenge that I think as I read this text to myself is, okay, so what from my past is God using to guide my conscience? And all of us you can deal with that on your own, but then I got to ask myself, have I taken responsibility for my guilt that I might have with that? Do I need to change my perspective on it? Because sometimes if we don't change our perspective on it, we can work past it, but we still wallow in it, and we until we change that perspective, we can't embrace God's grace on it, and then it controls us and defines us. And my challenge for us is to really look through that and work through that. Lee Strobel, he's got a book that is called Experiencing the Passion of Jesus, and I want to read you a little story here that he writes in it. He writes, an acquaintance called with what he said was an embarrassing request. His little girl had been caught shoplifting from our church bookstore and wanted to know if I would represent the church so she could come and apologize. He said he wanted to use this incident as a teaching moment. I agreed, but I had a much bigger lesson in mind. The next day, the parents of the 8-year-old daughter trooped into my office and sat down. Tell me what happened, I said to the little girl as gently as I could. Well, she said as she started to sniffle, I saw a book that I really wanted, but I didn't have the money. Now tears formed in her eyes and spilt down her cheeks. I handed her a tissue, so I put the book in my coat and took it. I knew it was wrong. I knew I shouldn't do it, but I did. And I'm really sorry. I'll never do it again, honest. I'm glad you're willing to admit that what you did, and you're sorry, I told her. That's very brave, and it's the right thing to do. But what do you think would be the appropriate punishment? She shrugged. I thought for a moment before saying, I understand the book costs $5. I think it would be fair if you paid the bookstore $5 plus 3 times the amount, which would make the total $20. Do you think that would be fair? She nodded honestly. Yes, she murmured. You could see the fairness in that. She could see the fairness in that, but now there were tears in her eyes. $20 is a mountain of money for a little kid. Where would she ever come up with that amount of cash? I wanted to use this moment to teach her something about Jesus, so I opened my desk drawer, removed my checkbook, and wrote out a check on my personal account for the full amount. I tore off the check and held it to her. Her mouth opened. I'm going to pay your penalty so you don't have to. Do you know why I'm doing that? Bewildered, she shook her head. Because I love you, I'll do that. Because I care for you. Because you're valuable to me. And please remember this, that's how Jesus feels about you too, except even more. At that moment, she reached out and accepted my gift. I wish I could find